Broadcasting live from the Buckhead Business Radio X studios in Atlanta, Georgia, it's time for Atlanta Legal Experts.
Good morning, and thank you for tuning in this morning. My name is Emily Rowell with attorneyofficespace.com, and welcome to Atlanta Legal Experts. We've got Rich Casanova here in the background.
I'll be producing engineering, not talking this morning. What, did I just say something?
And we also have Charlotte Merritt today. She is a co-host, and she's with Peachtree Offices. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yes. And today we have three special guests, legal experts. We have Charles Feeder with the Feeder firm. Good morning.
Good morning.
And Tracy Klinka with the Klinka Immigration firm.
Hello.
Good morning. And John Gunn with the Gunn firm.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for being here. So I will start with Charles Feeder. He is an AV-rated attorney with a broad background in commercial real estate, business acquisition, and economic development. He has worked with private developers, governments, and nonprofits as general counsel, corporate secretary, development director, board member, advisor, and consultant. Prior to entering the law, he was also an urban planner, college professor, and director of college urban studies programs. His work as an attorney has focused on acquisition and development of real estate and businesses, including multifamily housing, shopping centers, automobile dealerships, and restaurants, employing a wide range of public and private financing tools. His clients have included banks, developers, builders, manufacturers, retailers, economic development agencies, nonprofit corporations, municipal governments, commercial lenders, and professional practices. According to the Martindale-Hubbell Directory of Lawyers, he carries a peer rating of AV, meaning he exhibits the highest ability and integrity. Good morning and welcome to the show.
Good morning. I'm glad to be here.
Yes, so I have a couple questions here for you. Tell me a little bit about yourself, your background.
Well, I was at one point I was an academic and taught sociology at a couple of colleges in Ohio. I then went to Detroit and became an urban planner and worked there for several years and decided I still wasn't active enough in trying to change things and became an attorney. At that point, I practiced for a short time and then went to work for economic development agencies trying to develop the community, develop jobs and economic opportunities in Detroit. A frustrating a frustrating experience, to say the least. And then after that, I ended up working I went back to private practice. Then I worked as a retained counsel for economic development agencies and worked as a director of development and general counsel for a developer of senior housing across the country. We had projects from Massachusetts to California.
Wow.
Then I opened my own practice and worked, again, mostly in the economic development area. That meant loan programs, various government-supported programs for the SBA, for example, or revolving loan funds. We did some housing development. And I did all of that for a number of years. I had my own practice. And then when I came to Atlanta in 1998, I ended up working mostly with multifamily housing. A lot of it was federal tax credits, but also some commercial developments and office and retail spaces. More recently, my work has involved primarily acquisition of multifamily projects. There have been a lot of them that need to be updated that have gone through some tough times since 2008.
Yes.
And so a lot of people have been picking them up and turning them around, renovating them and getting them back on the market.
And that's your passion.
And that is. It's always been affordable housing.
Sure. And tell me, I'm ready to make an offer on a piece of commercial property. Why hire a lawyer when my broker says he can fill in the blanks on the realtor's standard purchase agreement form?
Well, you have to remember that the broker's primary interest is in his commission. And he wants to close the deal, and that's the most important thing. And that's not to say in any way that brokers are unethical. It's just that everybody has their own interests. The buyer, the seller, the lender, investors, each have their own interest, and they focus on it. And the focus of the broker is, of course, on closing the deal. and sometimes they view lawyers as deal breakers. I have, in 30 years of practice, only stopped 2 deals where it was clear either there was no good title or somebody was trying to commit fraud.
Gotcha.
But 2 deals out of many, many hundreds in 30 years is
Right.
Very small. For the most part, I work to try and close the deal as well, but protecting the interest of my client, whether it's the buyer or the seller.
So it sounds like you really you make the deal more solid, actually, because of the way everything's going to be done correctly.
Right. Yes, I try to make sure that the deal happens and that it happens properly.
Now, let me ask you, what should be included in a purchase and sale agreement?
Well, many things. Of course, a lot of it depends on the complexity of the deal. And I work hard not to over-lawyer a transaction. It depends on the size of the deal and its complexity. But there's some basics. You do need to have a property description and the names of the buyer and the seller, time limits for accepting or rejecting or engaging in investigations, and whether or not one of the parties can assign the rights. Very often, a buyer will make an offer under one name, but then set up a separate entity to actually go through with the purchase. The seller may be comfortable with the credit rating of one buyer and put some limits on to whom that might be assigned, although typically it's to a related party. It's just a new entity that's started. There's the matter of due diligence. There may be special conditions for the closing, which lawyers call the conditions precedent.
Okay.
You have to set a closing date, conditions under which there might be an extension of the closing date, and how much might have to be paid for it, whether that money is what we call going hard, that is not refundable, or whether it is. The amount of money, of earnest money, who's going to hold the money, when is it going to come back, to whom would it be returned, under what circumstances.
Wow, that's very
lot,
thorough.
There's a lot
Yeah.
that could be involved. It doesn't all have to be there.
So it sounds like you definitely do need a lawyer when you do these.
Well, I think it's best, depending. Some brokers think of themselves as lawyers, or think that it's just that the purchase agreement isn't really what's important, or that an offer isn't really what's important. It's the transaction itself, and they don't realize that the purchase agreement is, in fact, a contract, and you are bound by those terms. And it does help. And I had a recent incident where a client didn't want to retain a lawyer until they knew they had a deal, because, of course, they didn't want to lay out money ahead of time.
Sure.
Unfortunately, I spotted a term that I predicted was going to cause trouble, and sure enough, it did, and the deal fell apart.
Oh, no.
And there was no way that I could save it at that point.
Right. So starting earlier with an attorney makes it better for the client.
Absolutely. It's just good insurance.
Right. You mentioned due diligence. Can you explain a little more what that means?
Well, besides the things that we already mentioned, the purchase agreement should provide for access to the property, for enough time to look into things, such as title, whether a survey is required, whether there should be environmental studies, for example, soil and subsurface conditions, which can be crucial. And those can play into, for example, a construction contract, and who's responsible if something's discovered under the ground that you didn't expect.
Okay.
And I've had a number of difficult circumstances where there were disagreements between the owner or the developer and the contractor, when you run into very hard rock, or in one case, discarded concrete from a new highway that ended up being buried where we wanted to build an apartment.
Right.
There are structural conditions, there are zoning restrictions, there may be consents that are required by governments. And I could go on. I mean, obviously, if it's an occupied building, if you've got an apartment, for example. You want to review the financial records, look at the rent rolls, and notice who's going to give notices to tenants. Are there existing maintenance agreements or supply agreements for
Right.
for HVAC or for elevators or whatever? That gives you
Yeah.
some idea
Yeah.
of what's involved.
Just it's being as thorough as you possibly can.
Correct.
All right, I want to jump in.
Okay.
I've been just listening so quietly. It's not like me. I've
Okay.
got a question for you.
Sure.
Why do I need a lawyer if I'm buying or starting a business?
Well, of course, if that includes real estate, all of the matters that I suggested before would apply. But in addition to that, you may have, for example, if you're dealing with a shopping center space, there are commercial lease provisions having to do with the square footage, signage, what responsibility you may have for common area maintenance. Very often a lease will require a percentage of the gross sales to go to the landlord. These may all be negotiable. There may be use restrictions, meaning you want to know if you're putting in a restaurant, are you going to be the only restaurant, or are there going to be others? What are the limitations? And of course, the bigger you are, the more sway you have in determining what those are. What I call the 800-pound gorilla rule. The big boys get to choose. In a shopping center, typically the anchor tenants get first shot, and they are important to a developer because if you have a commitment from a major anchor that everyone knows is creditworthy, then it's easier to get a loan to finance the project. There are issues of parking and use restrictions and business licenses and permits, and whether or not some of them are transferable. One of the obvious examples, of course, is a liquor license, and you have to watch to be sure that that's taken care of. But you get the general idea. You could talk about telephone numbers or business names or
Signage.
employees.
That's a pretty long
You could
list.
go on and on.
I think it makes me really happy I have a virtual office. I don't have to deal with any of these things.
So
But I don't mean it to sound intimidating, but
Sure.
these are things that a lawyer will help you consider. They may or may not be relevant for your particular situation.
and it actually helps you, helps the person that buying the business. They're not going to think about all that.
Right, and I
Yeah.
just have that long checklist, and it may be that 80% of it isn't relevant to your situation.
Right.
But at least I go through an exhaustive list and make sure that all those things are considered.
I have a question for you. What types of people then do you look for? We, as a executive suites firm, we meet with people that are starting their own businesses every day.
Mm-hmm.
So can you explain a little more of who would be a good client for you?
It would be people who are purchasing a business or people who are purchasing real estate, and either existing real estate that's already developed, or people who are buying raw land and looking to develop it, whether it's a subdivision or an apartment project, or again, sale or purchase of businesses. There are a lot of issues that one should address.
Now, investors, would that be somebody you work with, or?
No, generally, sometimes what I try to do when I do come across investors is to hook them up with developers who are looking for financing.
Okay,
Because I
right.
generally represent the developers. I have on occasion represented investors as well in structuring, for example, a limited partnership so that their interests are protected.
Sure. Now, any referral partners, like people that you do work with that can refer you, their clients and vice versa? I would think like commercial real estate brokers.
Yes, commercial real estate brokers for sure, accountants, attorneys who are dealing in other areas of the law.
That makes sense. A lot
yeah.
of attorneys work with other attorneys that are specialized in their field.
Right.
Yeah. Well, great. It was great to have you on, and I'd love to hear exactly how they can get in touch with you.
Well, I do have a website, feederfirm.com. It's FEDERFIRM.com. My office phone number is 404-343-1757.
Great. Thank you again, Mr. Charles Feeder with the Feeder Firm. And for those of you just tuning in, now we are going to turn to Tracy Klinka.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. How are you this morning?
I'm good. I have coffee and I'm a happy duck.
That's great. I've had a little bit of coffee myself. Let me read your bio to get you started. Tracy Klinka has her own immigration law firm, Klinka Immigration, LLC, in Marietta, Georgia. Her practice revolves around family and humanitarian-based immigration. She is an active member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, serving on national and local committees. She is co-chair for the Georgia Asylum and Immigration Network, GAIN, which provides pro bono immigration assistance for victims of trafficking and violent crimes, including domestic violence. For the last 2 years, she has been a member of the Cobb County Domestic Violence Task Force. She often lectures on assisting vulnerable populations, particularly those who have been trafficked or been victims of domestic violence. She has both her BA and MA from the University of Kansas, and her JD was obtained at Georgia State University. She is licensed to practice law throughout Georgia, the 11th Circuit, and the U.S. Supreme Court. Very impressive.
Thank you.
Yes, yes. So a couple questions for you on immigration. Immigration options for victims of human trafficking, domestic violence, and other violent crime. Can you give me some examples?
Absolutely. And I think from reading my bio, you can tell that this is definitely my area of passion. And I think a lot of times people don't realize that when they're in a horrible situation, they've been trafficked into the United States, they've been beaten up by their U.S. citizen spouse, or they've been held up at gunpoint and were threatened with their lives, that they don't realize that they have options to go to the police. If somebody's in the country and they're undocumented, their first thought isn't, oh, let me go talk to law enforcement. They're going to protect me. Unfortunately, there's a certain bias maybe in the immigrant community that law enforcement isn't there to protect them, that they're there to maybe look over their immigration documents, to ask them about their status, potentially detain them, and start the deportation process. And so if you're a victim of domestic violence, you have young children at home, the last thing you want to do is put yourself in jeopardy by calling law enforcement. So one thing that Congress did was create what's called the U visa. And Congress realized that there was this big problem between the immigration or the immigrant community and law enforcement. Law enforcement would go into these communities and realize there was no trust. So Congress said, well, let's see if we can fix that and give both sides an incentive to work with each other.
Okay.
So the U visa is designed for victims of certain crimes, usually pretty horrible crimes that you wouldn't want anyone you know to be a victim of. Sexual violence, peonage, involuntary servitude, things of that nature. And if that person reports the crime to law enforcement, cooperates with law enforcement, and has suffered substantial harm, and in most of these cases that's just kind of implied, law enforcement can sign off on a document to say, yes, this immigrant, this undocumented immigrant in most cases, was helpful. With that, then we can go to immigration and ask for relief, and that is asking for a visa, which leads to work permission, and eventually would lead to a green card, permanent residency, and way down the road to U.S. citizenship. So it's a great way for someone to come out of a really dark place and gain their independence.
And that's where you come in.
That's where I come in.
That sounds wonderful. Tell me a little bit about unaccompanied minors at the border. This is obviously the huge issue today. What caused it? How can we help? And how is our state, the state of Georgia, impacted?
So this is not a new problem. I think certainly the numbers have increased and the media has gotten wind of it, so it has become a really hot topic to discuss. But at the end of the day, whether it's a hot topic or not, these children have been here and are coming here and will continue to come here. They're fleeing violence in their home countries. It's typically from Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. Nicaragua, it's interesting, actually doesn't have many of their children coming to the United States, even though they're the poorest of those countries, but they're not as violent. So I think it's really showing that it's gang violence and horrible things happening in those three other countries. And they're fleeing gang violence. And the government of Honduras, for example, has recently said, we can't do anything to protect our citizens.
Right.
So they're really left without
A
much
choice.
option.
Right.
And I do have a few of these kids as clients, and they have gone through horrible things. They have seen loved ones murdered. They have been victims of sex crimes. And, they're 12, 13, 14 years old. Now, when they get to the United States, typically they are caught pretty quickly by Customs and Border Protection. Then they try to have the children placed with foster care or a family member in the United States, ideally within 72 hours. It can take longer, of course. And they would come to Georgia because they have family here in Georgia, be it an undocumented parent, a cousin, brother, or sister who can take care of them. So they're not necessarily going into our foster care system. So
Right.
they are being cared for by their families. And then there may be ways for them to fight to stay here in the United States. There could be asylum, which I think a lot of people know about, dealing with persecution in the home country and things like that. But there's also what's called special immigrant juvenile status. And that would be for kids who have been abused, neglected, or abandoned by their biological parents and who cannot be reunited with that parent, and it's not in their best interest to return home. And there is somebody here in the United States who has guaranteed to take care of them. So that's another way, too, that immigration tries to help these vulnerable populations.
Can you tell me just a little bit more of what you were just saying about the asylum and exactly what that is?
Okay. So asylum is coming to the United States. You actually do have to come to the border or present yourself if you're already here as like a tourist and say, I fear to go back to my home country.
Okay.
I'm scared to go back on account of my race, religion, my nationality, my religious beliefs, I belong to a particular social group. I think a lot of people think of the LGBT community, especially maybe in a country like Russia, or because of my political beliefs, and that I specifically would be targeted. So it's really hard, in some cases, to get asylum when it's gang violence, because that's generalized.
Right.
And gang violence happens to really anybody who's alive and breathing.
Right.
So.
Right. Okay. Thank you for explaining that. Tell me a little bit more about immigration reform and what can President Obama, do?
So immigration reform has kind of been like a carrot dangling out there for immigrants and I will admit immigration attorneys too for the past few years. And the Senate passed a bill last year dealing with increased border security, potential pathway to citizenship, increasing work visa numbers to make it fit our economy better. But the House has refused to bring it up for a vote. So as things continue to get worse, situations go unfixed, President Obama can do administrative relief. He can't change the law, of course, that's not his job, but he can change how policies are interpreted. For example, lowering standards on certain types of relief, talking about maybe extending benefits such as the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival program that he instituted 2 years ago, potentially expanding that to a wider range of individuals.
Okay. Okay.
I'm going to jump in again. I like to jump in randomly. I have a question again. Can you tell me more about special immigration options for military families? I know that's a pretty big deal around here.
It is so nice. I'm so excited, too, because I just had a case last week that went through. And I guess just as background, typically if somebody enters the United States without paperwork, they have to return to their home country to get their status fixed. And if you're married to especially an active duty service person and they're stationed, let's say, in Japan, and then they're told that their wife has to return home to Guatemala, which we've just talked about is a horrible place to be, they're not going to be focused on their job. They're going to be like, is my wife safe? Where are our kids? How long is she going to be there? And if they're active duty, you don't want them to have to worry about that and worry about their family. I mean, they're sacrificing so much for this country. The least we can do is make sure that their family, their support system is taken care of. So there is a great program called Parole in Place. It was kind of quiet until about November last year when immigration issued guidance on how to actually do it. But if you are a family member of an active duty or even a veteran of the U.S. military, you can apply for Parole in Place. And what this does is it forgives you, basically, for entering the United States without documentation. So if you're married to somebody, your child is an active duty, or you're married to a veteran, then even though you entered the U.S. without documentation, you can apply for your green card here in the U.S., which is amazing and a great benefit, so you don't have to worry about that separation. And what also happens is if they're active duty, once they have their green card, that permanent residency, they can apply for expedited naturalization. So I had a client who went from undocumented to U.S. citizen within about 18 months, a process that would take most people a minimum of 5 years. So this was really a great way to keep the family together, and so that our service members can, rest as easy as possible.
That's wonderful. I don't want anybody distracted when they have a gun or any other explosives
No,
on them.
absolutely not.
I want them focused. What does it take? I mean, you talked about the process. That was an expedited process, 18 months, but normally the process is a lot longer. What exactly does it take to, and I'm just going to kind of on radio use quotes with my fingers that no one can see. Okay. What does it take to get legal?
So I think it's really hard, and I think about talking with my family at the Thanksgiving table about, why don't these people just get legal, get in line like everybody else? And the problem is that sometimes there is no line. Sometimes that line can be 80 years. So you always need a foundation in order to immigrate to the United States, be that a family member, which is what I can help with, or an employer, which I would certainly refer to somebody else. That's not my cup of tea. But you need a family member first to sponsor you. So if you're just here because you want a job and you've overstayed your visa maybe, you're probably out of luck. But let's say you've come to the United States, you're undocumented, you get married to a U.S. citizen. A lot of people also think, well, a U.S. citizen, that's the cure-all, the magic pill. It's not true. Like we said earlier, if you enter the United States without documentation, you do have to return home. And that can be very risky. You don't know if that visa petition is going to be approved. You may have to show that your family would suffer exceptional hardship if you couldn't return. And that's hard to think about and go through. And this is one of those areas President Obama could look at. Instead of showing that somebody would die, in essence, if you couldn't return, you could just say, look, we have family ties. It's an emotional hardship. And lowering that standard so it would be easier for the undocumented person to return home to the United States. And so there is that. If somebody's here in the United States and they did enter legally, they apply for a green card. That process can take about 5 months, so not a big deal, but they're not allowed to work during that time until they get a work card, which can take 3 months. So for those 3 months while they're waiting for paperwork to process, they're twiddling their thumbs. They're not able to contribute to society. It's really hard. And in Georgia, you can't get a driver's license. So they really are stuck in a tough place. And if you're, somebody who's used to being independent and working on your own and you're, back in your home country, that's a tough transition. So somebody gets their green card, and generally the wait is 5 years until someone can naturalize. Now, if you're married to a U.S. citizen, it's only a 3-year wait. We also talked about, getting in line, and immigration has created different categories of family members. So family members of U.S. citizens have a higher priority. They can get in line, and the line moves faster. But let's say you're the brother or sister of a lawful permanent resident or a U.S. citizen. That line is so slow. If you're the brother or sister of somebody from the Philippines, the line can be 80 years.
Wow.
80?
80.
Like 80.
Yes.
I mean, when you're saying 3 and 5 years, I'm thinking to myself, that is such a long time. I couldn't even imagine not being able to do anything and just waiting. But now you're saying 80 years.
It's because there's only so many visa numbers or visas available per year, per country, per
Right.
category. And, for the countries where we have the highest immigration, Mexico, India, China, the Philippines, we're looking at a really long wait because there are so many people who want to come to the U.S.
My ADHD was acting up when you said 3-month wait to get a job. Is there anything in place to help those people during those 3 months? I mean, you said they're twiddling their thumbs. I was hoping you were joking.
No, unfortunately not. They really are stuck not doing anything while they wait for their work card to come in.
Wow.
I know. And 80 is it's a lifetime.
Absolutely. But, if you don't get in line, it can never happen.
Sure. So for people that actually do get how do you go about getting the documents before you move to the country? Is that another long process? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
So if somebody's wanting to come to the United States as, say, the spouse of a U.S. citizen, they have to go through what's called consular processing and have their interview, at a U.S. embassy or consulate abroad. The paperwork can be cumbersome. That whole process, by the way, the consular processing takes longer than if they did it here in the U.S. Consular processing will take about 1.5 years. And during that time, at some point, that U.S. citizen needs to move back to the U.S., so you're going to look at some family separation issues there as well. But the paperwork is, like I said, cumbersome. You need a lot of originals that can be really tough to get from some countries. Original birth certificates, marriage certificates, divorce decrees. And, if you're looking at countries such as Nepal, Somalia, these documents can be very difficult to get. And the police clearance letter, you need a clearance from every country you've lived in for more than 6 months. And those are only valid for 3 months at a time. So it's a fine dance, too, between, working with these various governments to get the forms you need, working with the Department of State to make sure that they have in a timely manner, and then ultimately having them do their interview for the immigrant visa to come to the U.S.
Gotcha. Charlotte, did you have any other questions?
I do. I'm
Bring it.
Yes, I like her. We're going to keep her on. I'm from Midtown, so there's always issues in my mind that don't always hit everyone else. Same-sex couples, and immigration after the Supreme Court decision last summer. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, knowing that I've Googled it and I have the answer in front of me also?
Excellent. Hopefully it's the answer I wrote. So no, this is really very exciting. So last summer, the Supreme Court issued their decision in Windsor, which basically said that the federal government needs to respect legal marriages, that is, marriages that were legal at the place that they took place. So be that in another country or in a state here in the United States that recognizes same-sex marriages, such as New York, Washington, D.C.,
Indiana.
California. Woohoo! Iowa, of all places, too. But, of course, Georgia does not. So immigration benefits can now happen for same-sex couples. So like we've been talking about, it doesn't have to be a husband petitioning for a wife. It can be a husband petitioning for his husband, and which is fantastic. So instead of coming up with these convoluted ways for same-sex families to stay together, it's much more straightforward now. And they can do the same path that's been opened up to heterosexual couples for, well, really forever. And what's interesting is in Georgia, one of the first questions that came up is, well, we live in Georgia, but Georgia doesn't recognize our relationship. Can we still apply for immigration benefits here? Yes. The answer is yes. As long as the marriage was legal where it took place, immigration law is federal. So it doesn't matter where you currently live. It just matters that you were legally married.
So the answer I found on Google was not the one you gave. It had a lot of numbers and letters and do this form followed by that. Your answer's better.
Thank you. Yeah, immigration tends to be alphabet and number soup.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is.
I'm guessing you saw Form I-130, I-45, I-765, I-131, I-864.
And I-129F.
And that's the fiancé petition.
All right. Well, that answers my question.
Well, it sounds like you definitely are the legal expert in your field for sure. It was a pleasure having you today. If you could just tell our listeners exactly how they can get in touch with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So the website is klinkeimmigration.com. Klinke does not look like how it sounds. It's Klinke. It's German for doorknob. And then our phone number is 678-713-4255. And we are open Monday through Friday, 10 till 6.
Fantastic.
Great. Yes, thank you for being here. And you've been so quiet, John.
I've been hanging out in the corner.
Yeah. So we're glad to have you as well,
Thanks,
Mr. Gunn. Mr. Gunn is the founder of the Gunn Firm, PC, and one of Georgia's top divorce lawyers. He has been ranked by Thomson Reuters as one of the Georgia's super lawyers for 3 years in a row. Mr. Gunn was identified for his leadership in the family legal community in Georgia Trend Magazine's Legal Elite. He has also been awarded AVVO's Client Choice Award for his work in the family law field. Mr. Gunn has served as president of the family law section of the Cobb Bar Association, a member of the Board of Trustees of the Cobb County Bar Association, and on the board of the Cobb Justice Foundation. He has been appointed by the Superior Courts of Georgia as an expert in child custody matters through his work as a court-appointed guardian ad litem.
Yes, ma'am.
And one more quick little blip about you, and the rest can be found on our website, AtlantaLegalExperts.com. Mr. Gunn has coached and evaluated attorneys in actual and mock trials for more than half a decade, assisting them in developing trial advocacy skills. He has co-authored a number of Georgia appellate briefs, including one successfully argued before the Georgia Supreme Court.
Yes, ma'am.
That's good to have you here.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
So tell me some divorce statistics in the U.S. What is the average cost, and how long do they last?
Sure. Forbes magazine did an article in 2006 and said the average divorce in the U.S., contested divorce, runs around $15,000. That's in $06, and that's per person. So as of today, you're looking around an average contested divorce in the U.S. is around $20,000 per person.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a chunk of change. And the average case is going to run between 6 months and a year if it's contested. And we run about 100 cases a year is what we generally file and see for our firm. So, and at the other extreme, if it's an uncontested divorce, you're looking at about $1,200, somewhere between $500 and $1,200 at about 6 weeks.
Okay.
So the
much simpler.
the birth of the breadth there is stunning, between $20,000 and about $500, just depending on how you want to approach it.
Right, right. So tell me, how many? What's the
Sure.
average?
Like I said, we see about 100 cases a year is typically what we'll carry as a firm. And over the course of the last 100 years or two, the divorce injury itself and how divorces are handled by the courts has changed fairly dramatically. Back a couple hundred years ago, of course, the husband had everything, was permitted to beat the wife if he chose to, and had several grounds he could file for divorce that the wife was not entitled to file for divorce. For example, a couple hundred years ago, a wife could not file for adultery. Husband could. Kind of unusual like that.
Yeah.
Today's environment, we see a much more balanced playing field. Both parties are viewed to be able to manage their own affairs, to be able to think for themselves. So it's come a long way. And people sometimes remark on the divorce rate, roughly 50% of marriages end in divorce. And what we've seen over the last 20 years, roughly, is as uncontested divorces have become more popular, no-fault divorce, and the divorce cycle has become less onerous and people can agree to divorce rather than having to fight through it in court, we've seen the rates of domestic abuse drop dramatically. And spousal murder, and specifically, has come down dramatically in the U.S. over the last 20 years as no-fault divorces become more popular. So it's an intriguing industry.
Yeah. So tell me, you mentioned contested and uncontested. Sure. I have an idea, but for everybody that's listening.
Yeah. A contested divorce is what people traditionally think of as divorce. You see it a lot on TV. It starts by initiating lawsuits, somebody gets served, and then the two parties wrangle it out with attorneys through mediation and ultimately may end up going to trial. An uncontested divorce is merely a divorce where the two parties basically agree as to how they want to resolve the issues before they file the suit. So what we'll see is, and over the last 5 years, we've focused more and more towards uncontested divorce because it's so valuable to the parties. It's so helpful in order to be able to resolve your issues yourself versus having a court step in and try and figure it out for you on the limited information they have. But
sure.
For an uncontested divorce, we'll see the parties work together, reach an agreement, and then once the agreement is signed, then we file the lawsuit along with a petition asking the court to go ahead and approve the divorce based on the agreement they've reached. That's why it's so dramatically less emotionally tiring and much less adversarial and much less costly. It's basically once you reach an agreement, it's just a matter of filing the paperwork. So.
Sounds like it's a little simpler for you as well.
Oh, it's a level of magnitude. The revenue impact is not the same, and so we see a lot of attorneys. It's interesting in the industry. If it's going to be an uncontested divorce, obviously there's not going to be a lot of revenue for the attorney. If it's contested, the revenue can just be unbelievable. So you sort of have, from the attorney's perspective, there are pros and cons to both sides, and they're not always the same value assessment that the clients would view. So it is an intriguing aspect, yeah.
And you're saying you're going towards more uncontested, so that means you're actually doing what you feel is right, not looking for the paycheck or. Yeah,
it's tricky. It's a whole different industry. With contested divorce, of course, the margins are very high, revenue numbers tend to be high, staffing levels can be high. As we move towards an uncontested, between $500 and $1,500 per divorce, the margins are very thin, much more volume, and but at the same time, we typically can help people dramatically, a level of magnitude more than we can with a contested divorce, because everything remains in their hands. They get to make all the decisions. So as long as they can work together, the impact can be dramatic in terms of moving on with your life.
So just in-house, I like
Yeah.
to Google people, and I always have the answer in front of me. I pulled up that article, and it actually says the bulk of the money goes straight to the lawyers. And then I pull up your website, and I mean, your pricing, it's out there, it's up front, and you're saying, all right, I'm not going to be part of that Forbes article.
Right. We put the pricing on the web, which is fairly uncommon in the industry, but we thought it would be sort of a bold move to try and let people know that we're not getting around. This is for real what we want to do. We
Right.
also registered with the Better Business Bureau, which very few attorneys do, maybe 1% in the state. It's sort of a risky move, again, because once you register with the BBB, people can essentially try and extort resolutions from you by threatening to file complaints, those sort of things. So we saw it as a fairly bold move, and it is sort of where we took a stand and said, look, we're either going to be able to help people or we're just not going to be involved. So
I think of
It's
that
kinda
1%
fun.
of attorneys, I mean, you're in a very emotional divorce. You're already working with some emotional people. That's very bold.
one of the judges we were in front of made the comment that at one of the continuing legal education seminars, she pointed out that, when I see two people in front of me for a divorce case, before the case starts, I look down at the courtroom and I realize at least one of these two people is emotionally unstable. I get that. If they're in front of me, it's not going to be normal. So yeah, it is a very emotional, draining process if it's contested. It can be tough. Mm-hmm.
I was going to ask you a little bit. I'm going to go back on your experience and what made you get started in the family law practice.
Sure. I started with a couple of general practitioners, and I worked actually for the district attorney's office for a little over a year, and got some broad experience, and worked in some criminal law and contract law, and did a number of things. Ultimately, I ended up working with a really good family law attorney, got a level of expertise in that area, and I've always been drawn towards things that I tend to be fairly good at, and I enjoy sort of a high-level expertise. It's a very broad area of law with a lot of difficult issues that can come up. So it's sort of like working on a jigsaw puzzle. It takes some time to get good at it, and it's very complex. So, frankly, I enjoy the challenge, and I like helping people move forward. That's why we sort of move towards the uncontested. It's enjoyable to help people move forward with their lives, move beyond a difficult situation, and start over. And that's kind of fun. That's the piece that really provides the value, the bang for the buck, so to speak, helping people move on when they need to.
As a guardian ad litem,
Mhm.
can you tell me a little bit about, I mean, that must be rewarding. Can you tell me
It's,
about that, what that is, first of
yeah.
all, for our listeners, and then how you got into that?
You bet. The Georgia Superior Court can appoint an expert in a custody case on behalf of the children to speak for the children, and that's a guardian ad litem. And that's a court-appointed attorney who will investigate the issues surrounding custody in the best interest of the child, report back to the court. And typically it's a multi-month process involving family interviews, home visits, interviews with all the neighbors and teachers and therapists and so forth that the parties want to have interviewed. And what it provides, if you think about the average divorce case, if you assume you're going to go to trial, that trial is going to be about a day long, roughly.
Okay.
And that 8-hour trial, my piece is going to be about half that, right? So I'm going to have about 4 hours. The other attorney's going to have about 4 hours. And for
Right.
my 4 hours, 2 of that's going to be cross-examining his witnesses.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about a full divorce trial, my client's going to have 2 hours to present her case, and that involves his or her case, and that involves every witness they're going to have. So
Right,
the client
wow.
may have 30
Yeah.
minutes on the stand. That may be it. And for a
Sure.
court to try and
Wow.
evaluate the issues surrounding the children and custody and what's in the best interest of the children, never having seen either of these parties before,
Right.
and with a high likelihood that one of them is less than forthright with the court, it can be extraordinarily difficult. In fact, one of the judges we were in front of just about a year ago made the comment in open court that, look, I can't tell when my kids are lying to me. You want me to interview your kids? What are you thinking?
Right.
And it just goes
Wow.
back to how difficult and complex that process is. So the guardian ad litem is a court-appointed expert who can visit the homes and spend some time, a month or two, is essentially an unlimited amount of effort if needed, to interview the parents, the children, the associates, friends, family, teachers, and have a more balanced picture in terms of what is in the best interest of the child. So that's what a guardian ad litem is, and it can dramatically assist the court in terms of resolving issues.
Thank you so much. I've been coming up with even a lot more questions, but we'll kind of stick to the
Sure.
program here. Tell me, since we're talking about children, tell me about custody and how do they decide who's the better parent? How does the court decide?
It's difficult. And custody is one of the two issues. Typically, contested divorces are going to be focused on one of two issues, either the assets if there are substantial assets to the marriage and the parties can't agree in terms of how they should be divided, or custody. Custody tends to be the most difficult issue for people to address, and it can be, if you're going to see a case essentially run the gamut, it's going to be a custody case because it strikes home, it's close to people's hearts, and you can't quantify custody much
Right.
like you can the finances. So those are the cases that can be very, very difficult, and it will typically revolve around the conduct of the parties and what's in the best interest of the child. So it also is, not only is it a difficult and heart-touching area to address, it can be difficult for the court to get an accurate perception of what's the reality.
Sure.
And that's where the guardians can add value. But those are the difficult cases.
Yeah.
When people's children are involved, it's a big deal.
So
obviously.
you definitely need to make that judgment from the, visiting the home and interviewing the relatives and everything
Yeah, as a
as
guardian ad litem,
thoroughly as you can.
yeah, the guardian ad litem will have all those options. They can also request psychological evaluations on either or both of the parties and psychological evaluations on the children. So if it's a difficult case, a number of third-party experts can become involved, and the scope can expand essentially to the level of magnitude necessary to investigate the issues and work through them.
Now, has there ever been a case where I don't know if you counsel, if you work with counselors,
Sure.
with the couples prior to, and maybe they had changed their minds, or can you tell me a little bit about
Yeah, all
that?
those things happen. Typically, by the time people get to the point that they have consulted an attorney with regard to divorce, it's usually gotten to the point where it's very unlikely that they're going to get back together again.
Sure.
And but a fairly substantial portion of our clients, maybe 30%, have worked through marriage counseling before coming to us. And typically, what we find is that the higher tier of the marriage counselors are effectively trying to help the couple decide not so much how to fix the marriage, but whether or not it's best to move forward with the marriage.
Right.
And in a number of cases, they'll resolve those issues and move forward with their lives and remain married. If they're unable to do that, then they'll come work with us, and we'll help. Ideally, we're going to try and help resolve the marriage, bring it to a close without, with the least amount of angst.
Sure.
Working together, ideally with the other side, to resolve what issues we can. And a good marriage counselor can be enormously helpful in that regard.
Right.
They-
So working with them is
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we, in fact, we seriously considered it, and this is not a joke, we literally spent more than a couple of months debating internally as a firm whether or not we were actually going to add a clause to our contract requiring all clients to have a professional counselor, a therapist, before we would retain them as a client.
Wow.
Ultimately, we didn't add it to the contract, but that's the level of magnitude it got to, is we
Right.
seriously considered adding it as a requirement before they could retain us as an attorney.
Sure.
It's a big deal.
Sure.
Mhm.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again. Is there
Yeah.
anything else, Charlotte, that you might have to ask?
I don't know much about divorce. My only
That's probably good.
experience with it is a really old movie called The Women, and a bunch of ladies in black and white got on a train, went to Reno, rode horses, came back divorced.
That's awesome. I've been to Reno. I've ridden horses, but it's as close a relationship as I've got on that one.
That's all I know.
I've been fortunate enough. My parents have been married for, I don't even want to say how long.
And they are
great.
adorable.
1969, and they're still together.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I don't know much about
And that's
divorce
exciting,
either,
too,
but
yeah.
the 50% is just astounding. It's
Yeah, it's just a part of reality.
Yeah. Mhm.
And the benefit to that is that we see domestic violence rates drop dramatically
I
in
know.
no-fault divorce
I
states.
loved that. I never even thought about it that way.
Sure.
So, yeah, that's awesome. And
Mhm.
and it sounds like you definitely have the integrity you need.
We try.
Yeah, and you stay with the client throughout the process, and
Mhm.
and I just think it's wonderful. So
That's great.
we're so glad you were here. If you could tell our listeners how they can get in touch with you.
You bet. My name is John Gunn. You can Google me. And our website is thegunfirm.com. That's 2 N's in gun, thegunfirm.com. And our phone number is 404-969-4505. We handle family law cases all throughout the metro Atlanta area. We're based in Marietta and have an office downtown as well. That's Scoop.
We have 2 Marietta
Yep.
attorneys
I
here
noticed
today. Yeah. So I thought that was a good show. What did you think, Charlotte?
I think it's always a fantastic show.
Thank you, and thanks for listening, everybody. We're excited to have a great show coming up next week as well. If you are actually listening, this show is sponsored by Da Vinci Virtual Offices and Da Vinci Meeting Rooms. If you are interested in part-time offices, meeting rooms, or need a professional business address for your business or for a second location in Atlanta, you can find their links on our Atlanta Legal Experts website. That's atlantalegaleexperts.com. Click on the Da Vinci logo for ALE listener specials and promotions. And don't forget to mention ALE, Atlanta Legal Experts Radio. All right, this
All right.
is Emily Rowell.
Another great show. We'll see
Yeah.
you next week.